is inherent risk? Residual risk is inherent minus controls. Do you subtract likelihood from impact? How many measures do I need to apply? What the hell is going on with risk? All of those questions I bet you've asked numerous times before. And I don't blame you. I've asked the same questions myself. And other people are asking the same way you do. The thing is, risk management can be complicated, but it can also be very simple. And in this video, I want to explain in clear language, with no technical terms, simply, cleanly, and in a memorable way, so that you know what IT risk management is, why it's so important, what are its core elements, and by the end of the video, you will become an expert. Okay, maybe not an expert, but you will become very, very familiar with IT risk management, and you will be able to say, okay, I got this. And I'm gonna make it fun for us as we are traversing the mountains of Arcadia together. So grab your backpack, wear your shoes, and let's start our hike. My name is Yannis, and this is the ITGRC here. Let's go. As I said, IT risk management is a complicated topic and it can have a lot of nuance and a lot of detail. But in this video, I'm going to make it clear and very specific. However, this requires that we set some ground rules or we understand the basics of what IT risk management is, why it is so important, and how to navigate this treacherous path of IT risk. So imagine that we are embarking our hiking journey together and we are just starting, we're just getting ready, we're just packing our stuff and making sure that we have enough supplies, that we know what the weather is like, we know what to expect, we know our route. We will start our journey the same way almost every journey starts, or as every journey should start, with proper preparation. As we embark, as we sit together, we plan our journey ahead. We make sure we have enough provisions. We make sure that our backpacks are full of our essentials. We have enough water. We have a flashlight in case of an emergency. And this is the very first step of an actual IT risk management process. Do you see what we did? We prepared. We ensured that we have taken all the measures necessary in order to survive our journey and come back safe and sound with beautiful moments and memories from that trip. But in order to do that, we need to do something very important first. And that important thing is taking account of all the risks, all of the potential circumstances and events that could impact us deeply, physically and mentally during our trip. You probably know, and if you don't know, I'm telling you that going into a trip in the mountains of Arcadia is a fun activity, but it is also very dangerous potentially. There's wolves, there is bears, there is pieces of wood that you can scratch you and you can get splinters from them. There are hills that are very treacherous, there are steep incline paths that are very narrow. And of course you can imagine what that means, right? Making sure that you take note of all of those potential events is the very first step before even you start planning for the journey ahead. So what I said before is making sure that we have our gear ready, but before that we need to be aware of the challenges that await us and the challenges that are waiting in the corner. This is risk identification. Risk identification is having an overview of the potential events that would lead to a risk. And that risk could have an impact on our well-being, on our health, and so on and so forth. But here's the interesting part, right? Because you need to know what risk actually is if you want to be sure that you take note of it and you are aware of that risk, right? Those events. What is risk at the end of the day? Any risk. Well, risk is any event that if it materializes, if it happens, then it can cause harm. It can lead to negative consequences. Of course, there is risk that is positive as well. I take a risk, I maybe take a gamble at something, I take advantage of an opportunity, which is a positive thing, but in this case we're talking about risk as having a negative connotation. So risk is a set of conditions that if they materialize, they have a particular impact, they have a particular effect. And then you can easily understand that risk at the end of the day is just an effect of a potential or a likelihood of an event taking place times its impact, times its damage, let's call it like that. So if I go back to my example and I think, okay, I want to go for a trek, what am I going to take into account before I wear my shoes and get ready, get out the door and start trekking? It's the bear that hides in the bushes. It's the bad weather that might affect my hiking and my lack of a good grip, for example, if the soil is too wet. Or potentially the lack of GPS signal and I don't have very good navigation skills, so I get lost in the woods and then, yeah, I have a bit of a problem, right? So all of those things are risks. It's a potential event, and the likelihood of that event times its impact is what constitutes risk. This is what we call risk in IT also. The same applies to every aspect of our lives, but again, here we're taking that knowledge and we're transferring it to IT, and you will see how the dots connect as we move along. So what did we do? We wrote down, or we made a mental note of all the risks that can potentially happen, that can materialize, and then we think consciously or unconsciously sometimes, okay, how likely is it that this event is going to happen? And then what is the impact if it happens, actually? The likelihood is something that can be calculated by, for example, thinking about the news, right? You look at the news and you see, okay, a person was attacked by a bear last year, and then the year before that, and then the year before that as well, maybe 2 times. That means that the likelihood that this happens again, it's not 100%, but it's also not 0. And that's something that you need to take a note of, right? If you think about your phone dying and then you don't have reception and then you don't have GPS, how likely is that to happen? Well, if my trip lasts for 2 days and I don't have a power supply, a power bank, or a plug to use to charge my phone, then the likelihood is very big. The impact, on the other hand, is how big the damage is gonna be if that event materializes. Of course, if a bear encounters me, well, the impact is on the bear. I'm joking, the impact is on me, but it's a big impact, right? Worst case scenario, I am dead. Best case scenario, I have a lot of bruises and a lot of scratches on me, and that is something that I need to be very careful of. So this is how we do risk identification. We know what the risk is, we see it, we take a note of it, we think about it, and then we move on to the next step. And what is the next step before we even get out of the house? It's that particular exercise that I also mentioned, which is calculating the risk itself, making sure that we have a mental note or an actual physical note of the risk, and then what we do is we take those 2 numbers or those values and we multiply them, and then we have our risk. So this is how we do risk assessment. We assess the risk. It's not just theoretically identifying the risk, which is the first step. The second step is to actually assess the risk. But here's where most people actually miss a critical detail, and that detail is that that risk is static but also dynamic. So we actually have 2 types of risk. We don't just have 1 type of risk. We have what we call the inherent risk of a particular event, and we have the residual risk of that event taking place. And what is the difference between those 2? In our example, the inherent risk is the risk that we have if we don't do anything at all and we don't consider any measures that we take that could potentially mitigate that risk. For instance, if we're talking about our hiking journey up in the mountains, what is inherently a risk is the existence or the presence of the bear, the brown bear in the mountains. And how likely and how impactful is that? The likelihood is the same because there's a certain amount of bears in those mountains, and there's a particular likelihood that we will encounter or not encounter a bear during our hike. The impact of our exposure to the bear is also very specific. If the bear is hungry, for example, if it's, for instance, a season where bears are taking care of their young, let's say, or they just woke up from their winter slumber and they just are very hungry, then it's more likely that they might, think of us as a threat or as a potential source of food. In that case, yeah, the impact is particularly high, most likely, and as a result, the risk itself is quite substantial. So we have the inherent risk, and we also have the residual risk that we will piece together later, which is the risk that is left after we do something about it. So it's not just we take a note of the risk, but then we take some measures in order to protect ourselves against the risk. And what is left at the end, because there's always something left at the end, this is the residual risk. This is what's left over. A good way to think about it is residual risk is inherent risk minus the controls that we apply, minus the measures that we put in place to protect ourselves against that risk. That's the simple explanation of what residual risk is. But let's not run ahead of ourselves. There's a lot to cover still. And this is a great opportunity to talk about threats and vulnerabilities. This is also an important element of what risk management actually is. When we're talking about threats, what do we think about? We think about the bear, right? The bear itself is a threat. The bad weather itself is a threat. A threat takes advantage of a vulnerability. It takes advantage of a gap, and it exploits that gap. The bear takes advantage of our weak frame, for example, because compared to the bear, we are smaller and we are not very capable. We cannot fend off the bear. It takes advantage of the scent we leave behind that can be a vulnerability that can lead the bear to us. It takes advantage of its speed and its agility, or rather our lack of speed compared to the bear again. So these are the things that the threat will take advantage of, the vulnerabilities that we have, in order to exploit them and get to us. And that is creating a likelihood and an impact and then a risk at the end of the day. This is the simple way of thinking about threats, exploiting vulnerabilities, and that could lead to a potential impact, and then we have a problem. I am at the hospital, or worse. I don't know. Now you see, we haven't even left the house yet, and there's already a lot of things that we need to take into account and consider. The next thing we need to think and we need to keep into account is the following. We have taken a note of everything that can happen. We have considered inherent risk, residual risk, threats and vulnerabilities. We know what to expect more or less, and now it's time for us to plan and to prepare for those potentialities, let's call them like that. I like this word. What do we do if those things materialize? Or what do we do to prevent them from materializing? As I said before, inherent risk is the risk before the controls. Now it's time for us to apply those controls. It's time to prepare. It's time to put measures in place. It's time to be proactive, and it's time to make sure that the likelihood and or the impact of an event is as low as possible, so that we suffer as minimal damage as possible. In our hiking experience, what do we do when we are venturing into the woods? We take basic measures, right? We wear comfortable clothing, we wear our best shoes that are suitable for hiking. We make sure that we potentially grab a pepper spray in order to deter bears or to prevent them from attacking us. We ensure that we don't carry with us meat or any substance that can leave off smells. We ensure that we check the weather. We ensure that we have our batteries charged and that we pack our power banks and our chargers so that we can charge our phones in case of emergencies. We make sure that we pack enough water and resources so that we can eat and sustain ourselves. All of those things are controls. All of these things are measures that we take in order to minimize the likelihood and the impact of the events that could potentially take place. These are what we call controls. There's a lot of controls. I won't go into extreme details about controls. I'll make a different video about this topic, so if you want to watch that, subscribe to this channel and follow me for more information on IT risk management and much more. But regardless, this is the purpose of these controls, and this is what we do in order to ensure that if things escalate, then at least there is a way for us to protect ourselves and to get back home unscathed. So we did all of the things that we had to do at this point. We have identified the risks, we have assessed the risks, and then we have also taken measures. And the measure taking in IT risk management and risk management in general is called risk management, of course, or risk mitigation. Even though there's many ways to manage risk, it's not just mitigation. You can have many different ways of addressing that particular risk. But funnily enough, our journey is not over yet. I mean, it just started, right? We are still in the house. We haven't stepped out the door. So we're still preparing for actually venturing out in the wild, and finally we go out in the wild. And then from then on, whatever happens, happens, right? The bear might attack, the weather might go bad, the signal might be lost. All of those scenarios might materialize or might not, of course, but this is the time that we actually go out and those risks can or cannot happen. So we went from a place of preparation, from a place of proactiveness, of planning, preparing, thinking, to a place of actually doing something. Exposure, in other words. We are exposed to those risks and then we are subject to the likelihood and the impact that we discussed before. However, there is one last step that we need to take, and we are not done. In fact, we are never done with risk management. The last step we need to consider very carefully is risk monitoring. We need to always be thinking about the risk, the events that could lead to the risk, the impact and the likelihood of that risk as well. Because I can go for a hike now, which is low season for bears. They're probably sleeping during winter, so it's okay for me to venture and go out in the mountains. But if I go early spring or mid-spring, then the likelihood, the chances that I will encounter a bear rise substantially. So I need to be consciously and constantly mindful of that risk, and every time I am about to be exposed to that risk, I need to know, I need to keep monitoring it, I need to keep being aware of that risk. And this is a big mistake that I see time and time again of IT GRC practitioners, IT risk managers and everybody in the field, that they forget that they need to monitor the risk. It's not a one-off activity. Everything that we discussed needs to take place again and again and again, otherwise it won't work. Now, let's take all of the things that we learned from our journey, our hike in Arcadia, and move it into IT, right? We started with risk identification. We identified that, yeah, there might be a bear up in the mountains. Yes, there are splinters that we need to be careful, or there's toxic plants that we might encounter. We should be careful not to eat or touch any of them, and so on and so forth. In IT terms, this is the bad actor, this is the attacker, this is exposure to outside threats, this is non-compliance with our policies or frameworks, this is loss of data, this is a server going down, this is the identification of IT risk in that case. The assessment of that IT risk is calculating once again the impact and the likelihood of those events manifesting. So how likely is it that my one-person company that is processing minimal data is going to be a target of a state actor? We perform this activity for every single risk item that we have in IT. But then, after we do that, we need to move to the next step, which is the actual risk management. We need to put the guardrails in place. We need to secure our servers. We need to educate our staff. We need to have policies in place. We need to ensure that we have fences so that we can prevent physical attacks. These transfer once again to IT, and then we know how we can protect our IT infrastructure from various threats that are coming from outside, coming from inside as well, coming from regulators, coming from clients, coming from our third parties, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, once again, the monitoring. Don't forget about the monitoring. Everybody forgets about the monitoring. We should keep an eye out. Never sleep on the risks. The risks are there. The risks are not going anywhere unless you move away from them completely. Risks need to be constantly updated. We need to constantly keep an eye out for the risks. We need to be sure that we have a register that we can monitor, that we can flag alerts, and we can ensure that we pick up on those risks and we can do something about them. If something changes with them, we need to be always on top of them. Now, before I leave you, I want to highlight that I have created the free IT GRC preparedness checklist that you can find in the description of this video. You can download this completely free. You can use it as you wish. it will help you quite a lot to understand the basics of IT governance, risk management and compliance in a way that is easy, clear and gives you some structure so that you can apply those elements of governance, risk management and compliance that every company out there needs, let's face it. So this will help you jumpstart your career in IT GRC. Download it in the description of this video. Now, I'm also curious about two things. The first thing is, do you know where Arcadia is? The second thing is, what is the biggest challenge for you in understanding risk management and what concept is the most difficult for you to grasp? Leave those in the comments below. I will read all of them, I will respond to all of them. Let's have some fun. Let's exchange geography knowledge and also let's have a chat about IT risks and what is your challenge when it comes to IT risk management. Stay safe and secure both in the physical and the digital world. Until next time.